Welcome to Behind the Briefings. I am so excited to get into this because we are looking at the sort of not only the origins of JKC Smart Moves, which is a form of system intelligence. It was originally designed as a foundation of 6 briefings that focus on a variety of issues, but defines a system of decision making. And that was critical. But that decision making came from the work that I continually do for the last 20 some odd years in the areas of the intersection of business, disability, innovation, leadership, mental health, and culture, and how that intersection plays out in everyday life, and specifically in the world of work. And for me, one of the most important aspects of that has been to understand the world of disability. And for most people, when we think about the world of disability, we always think about it in terms of sort of policy or politics, or the area of saying, how do we define a more equitable, in a more equitable world, a more inclusionary world. But I want to take this a little further. And one of the things I talk about both in the foundational briefings, but more importantly over the last 20 years, and specifically over the last 10, I would say, of how do we look at disability differently? And what I mean by that is, let's sort of start with the numbers. The numbers themselves. We have today close to 1.6 billion people with disabilities on a planet of 8 billion. We're talking close to sort of 20% of the population. We're also talking about an aging planet and people who are 50, 60, 70 plus really sort of leaning into disability just by age. And for many people, they don't want to sort of assume the moniker of someone who is disabled, but it's more functional. What that means is the world itself has to change in terms of inclusion, in terms of design, and how we think about it. Businesses have to redefine themselves, not only from a workforce perspective, but also products and services. When we look at the disability and longevity economy, we're talking about an economy that is now, in essence, somewhere close to $60 trillion combined. And that's an important number, and that number will continue to climb. So I have been thinking about this in a different way, not disability from a policy perspective, not disability from a political perspective, but something different. Looking at disability through the lens of management, through the lens of culture in a way that we haven't before. Why is disability important? Why is disability important in terms of our quality of life? That was critical. And how do you engage that as part of a larger business conversation? And what I have come across with is that disability in itself is foundational in terms of a new management theory. It's foundational in the sense of how we look at the lived experience. How we look at the lived experience in the sense of what disability provides, not sort of takes away, which is what the sort of verbiage actually means, disability. But in fact, I think that in itself is a false narrative. What's important is to understand what disability can provide as a value add. And what I mean by that is the lived experience provides people a way to think creatively, to be the sort of ultimate hack, if you will. We sort of are always having to live in a world that isn't designed for us. I will tell you, as somebody who has a right hemiparesis, a form of cerebral palsy, I live every day always having to think about, how do I navigate the world differently? how do I think about it? It's become so innate that I don't even think about it. But what I do think about is, certain products and services that I particularly are gravitate towards or drawn to, that meet my needs, or the fact that I'm sort of constantly thinking creatively. I'm constantly thinking empathetically, and I'm always thinking with a sense of urgency to a certain extent of how we look at the world differently. So, all of that being said, I've sort of begun to break it down in how we begin to think about disability as a management style. So, what does that mean? It means that there are certain key elements that are critically important when we think about disability in terms of business parlance. What does it mean? Disability means creativity. Disability means a greater awareness of innovation. Disability means the idea of how do we think differently? How do we engage differently? Disability also means that it isn't always about rapid efficiency, that it actually means that what does slowing down mean? And being able to see things in a way that others haven't, because it's sort of constant iteration. And that is fundamental. And in the age of AI, in the age of technology, it is fundamentally critical to recognize that we all have to think differently. We all have to assume different stances and what provides a competitive edge. That's fundamentally critical. And that's what disability provides. It asks us to question, always question, because what we are faced with is a reality that doesn't fit. And when a reality doesn't fit, how do we begin to hack it? Again, these are sort of thematic issues that I've been writing about for quite a while. But I want to be able to articulate it in a way that is important. And I think the sort of vital aspect of today is to recognize disability goes far beyond the idea of just less than, but rather something more. And what is critically important is that we are having an aging population. And for many, they don't want to define themselves as disabled. But functionally, that's a reality. And that functionality from a marketing perspective, and when you talk about a sort of total area market, for example, a TAM, you're looking at a SKU that is continually growing, that technology is needed. I mean, if you look at consumer electronics shows in Las Vegas, there is an entire section for aging and disability, which is critically important. Why? Because you have a consumer market that needs different types of technology for just better quality of life. And these are markets that are beginning to open up, and we are hearing terms like universal design, accessibility become more and more part of our everyday lives. People sort of ask me all the time, well, so what is sort of the end game to this in terms of just having accessibility part of our everyday lives? I say, well, here it is, glasses. We don't think about glasses as an accessible technology. Why? Because it has sort of become part of our everyday lives. It has become part of our identity in terms of design, but rather it's just there. It's utilized as a tool of accessibility. We don't think about it as an other. We think about it as part of who we are. People buy glasses and they buy certain designs that reflect them. That, I think, is going to be one of the key elements. How do we look at accessibility in terms of tools and design that just become part of everyday life. It isn't an other, it's just an added element to our everyday lives. So that is something to think about. And I think when we look at disability as a sort of management idea or a language of business, which is really what I sort of want to get to finally today, is that needs to be essential. I think it eventually needs to be taught in business schools, but that's another area that I can discuss for another day. But I wanted to present this to you, see what your thoughts are. And I will see you next time for Behind the Briefings. Thanks so much.